Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al24 Nightly News. I'm your host, Miriam Zien, and here are your top stories. In Libya, the death toll from the devastating flash floods remain unclear, and the UN humanitarian agency expects the toll to rise. The Kremlin said that no agreements were signed during North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's ongoing visit to Russia, while the historic Russian-North Korean summit seems to distress the US and its allies. And USM Algeria secured their first CAF Super Cup victory against the Egyptian giant Al Ahly. Welcome to the news. We start with Libya, where the number of people killed by the devastating flash flooding remains unclear. The United Nations Humanitarian Agency, OCHA, said it expects the toll to rise. This comes as the UN is urgently seeking more than $71 million to assist those most in need after deadly flash floods swept Libya over the weekend. And the UN envoy to Libya, Abdoulaye Bathily, said the North African country cannot face alone the crisis caused by the devastating floods. Abdoulaye Bathily hailed collective efforts by Libyans in responding to the crisis. He expressed gratitude to the countries that have sent rescue teams, equipment, and life-saving supplies to help Libya in this difficult time.
The Libyan people have set a great example of unity, compassion and resilience in the face of this devastating tragedy.
And Algeria's civil protection reported recovering 18 bodies in the ongoing search for the missing individuals under the wreckage from Hurricane Daniel in Derna, Libya. Algeria's civil protection stated search operations persist with divers, canine units, rescue teams and medical personnel. Algeria dispatched a team of 113 disaster response experts to aid the search and provide humanitarian assistance via an air bridge. And following the earthquake that devastated Morocco's mountainous areas, many rural families were forced to build improvised shelters out of straw and plastic due to extensive damage to their homes. This situation is aggravated by a considerable delay in the distribution of aid. Hossam Berkan has the report.
In the mountainous village of Azmoun, one of the hardest hit areas, roads and rugged pathways have been rendered impassable by the earthquake's destruction. Consequently, aid and relief teams face tremendous difficulties in reaching hundreds of residents who are at risk due to ongoing aftershocks. Mohammed faces a difficult choice as he gazes at his children. He must decide whether to return to his old cracked mud house or remain in a cramped tent that offers limited space for his family members.
Now we need tents for people to stay in because most of the people lost their homes or their houses are damaged. We need shelters for women and children after that. If there is something solid, we also need it. But for now, what we need are tents because people are sleeping outdoors. They put their clothes in other houses because their homes are destroyed.
Zidane, who lost everything in the earthquake, now finds solace sleeping under the open sky. He relies on donkeys to transport aid and donations from generous benefactors due to the scarcity of supplies reaching the region.
We use donkeys to transport aid and goods because the road does not exist. And we live in the mountain. People were greatly affected by this earthquake, and they have nothing. We live in the open, and we have nothing.
Numerous families have sought refuge in tents crafted from straws and plastic, offering minimal protection from scorching daytime heat and chilly nights, along with challenges of securing water and food.
Our life is changed a lot. We are now homeless. Our houses is all full, and also my dad job and all this was in Souk, so all that is gone. Now we feel scared, and like in the nights, I always feel scared until I sleep. Okay.
Despite the profound human and material losses caused by the earthquake, there remains a glimmer of hope for a future in which a sense of security is restored to the hearts of those affected.
The International Monetary Fund Director Kristalina Georgieva told Reuters that IMF and World Bank will decide on Monday whether to proceed with their annual meetings in October in Morocco, which was recently struck by an earthquake, noting that this will take place after completing comprehensive review of the country's capacity to host meetings. The Geneva Group for Human Rights in Western Sahara called on the UN Human Rights Commissioner's office to reveal reasons for obstructing visits to occupied Sahrawi territories for over 8 years. In a statement to the UN Human Rights Council endorsed by 300 organizations, they referenced a recent UN report highlighting the Commission's inability to visit Western Sahara for an 8th year. Under Niger's new military administration, which has seized power in the West African nation, France's ambassador has effectively been taken hostage, said President Emmanuel Macron, according to French media. Besides, the ambassador is forced to eat only military rations, as Niger's leaders do not allow fresh supplies into the embassy compound. Emmanuel Macron made his statements during a visit to Semur-en-Auxois town, according to broadcaster at BFM TV.
Quant au Niger,
in Niger, we have an ambassador and diplomatic staff who are literally being held hostage in the French embassy as I speak. Food deliveries have been prevented, they are eating military rations, and they are staying there because, quite simply, France, which supports democracy and considers that there are no double standards for Africa, considers that President Bazoum, who is being held hostage in his own country, is the legitimately elected president. How can you expect us to issue visas or engage in cultural cooperation when you no longer even allow an ambassador to go out, when he is persona non grata and we refuse to allow him to eat?
des rations militaires.
Burkina Faso's military leaders has ordered the French embassy's defense attaché to leave the country due to subversive behavior. Emmanuel Pasquier's expulsion is the latest sign of escalating tension between the West African nation and its former colonizer France since the military council seized power in 2 coups last year. The statement said Pasquier and his personnel had 2 weeks to leave the country, while France's foreign ministry said it was looking into reports of the expulsion and could not immediately comment. The commander of the Rapid Support Forces, Mohamed Hamdan Hamditi, said that his forces would begin consultations to form what he called a civil authority in the areas under their control. Hamditi indicated in an audio recording attributed to him that the move comes in response to what he described as the attempts of the president of the Sovereignty Council to claim false legitimacy, as he put it, adding that the Sudanese army's position in the east and north are within the reach of his forces, and that they can enter the city of Port Sudan, which is considered a strategic headquarters for the army. The Ukrainian military announced retaken Andriivka town, about 10 kilometers south of Bakhmut on the Eastern Front. The Ukrainian General Staff reported partial success in the Klishivka area, inflicting significant enemy casualties and equipment losses. Moscow declared control over Bakhmut last May due to extensive battles and bombings. Since June, the Ukrainian army launched a counterattack against Russian forces in the east and south. Russia said on Friday that it had not signed any agreements on military matters or any other areas with North Korea during Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia this week. The Kremlin said there hadn't been a plan to sign any formal agreement during the visit.
Agreements were signed between Russia and North Korea either on the military topic or on others. There were no plans to do so. As for these statements, I would recommend you to listen to Vladimir Putin's answer.
Putin emphasized Russia's commitment to international agreements on the Korean Peninsula, including sanctions against North Korea. He dismissed allegations of North Korean support in the conflict with Kiev during a press statement with Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko.
This morning, I was informed that 300,000 contracts have been signed. Korea is our neighbor, and we must maintain good neighborly relations. Yes, there are unique aspects concerning the Korean Peninsula. We have never violated anything, and we will not in this case.
And as you followed in our top stories, the historic Russia-North Korea summit could mean worrying weapons developments in Ukraine, and the North Korean leader's military ambitions may distress the United States and its allies. Marwa Bulaiwer.
A rare meeting between Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un earlier this week has triggered concern for countries from South Korea and Japan to Ukraine, the United States and its allies in Europe. Yet China, the biggest economic lifeline for both Moscow and Pyongyang, may have a different view. Analysts suggest that Beijing may see more benefits than risks for itself in this emergent axis, particularly in regard to its great power rivalry with the US. During their meeting on Friday, senior diplomats and defense officials of South Korea and the United States agreed that military cooperation between North Korea and Russia is a serious violation of UN sanctions and that the allies would ensure there is a price to pay.
We agree that Russia-North Korea military cooperation is a serious violation of the UN Security Council resolution, and Russia should act responsibly as a founding member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and a permanent member of the UN Security Council.
The US said that the two leaders will identify, expose, and counter Russian attempts to acquire military equipments for the war in Ukraine.
Our view has been before the visit and after the visit that talks about the provision of weapons by North Korea to Russia to kill Ukrainians have been advancing and continue to advance. I can't name a specific agreement for you today, but we take a look at that with a heavy grain of salt.
As Russia accuses South Korea of supplying weapons to Ukraine, and the US accuses North Korea of supplying them to Russia. The two respective allies for both countries are intentionally dragged into a distant duel as a result of the Ukrainian war, which has heightened the tensions between Washington and Moscow.
Poland, Slovakia, and Hungary said they will impose their own restrictions on Ukrainian grain imports. This comes after the European Commission decided not to extend a ban affecting Ukraine's 5 EU neighbors. Nabil Khazini has more details.
The recent calm over the Black Sea grain deal appears to be broken after 3 EU countries said they would impose their own restrictions on Ukrainian grain imports. Poland, Slovakia and Hungary threatened they are ready to unilaterally reintroduce bans on Ukrainian grain imports after the current ban negotiated by the EU expired on Friday. The European Union says the bloc's countries should refrain from such one-sided measures.
So what's important right now is that all countries work in a spirit of compromise, engage constructively, and that we are finding this solution. And clearly, the best, of course, would be that member states would refrain from unilateral measures and work along the lines of this agreement.
The European Commission has lifted the temporary bans on Ukrainian grain after Kiev agreed to tighten control over its agricultural exports, a move welcomed by the Ukrainian president.
Restrictive measures against our agricultural exports from the European Union have been lifted. It is important now for European unity to work at the bilateral level as well, so that neighbors support Ukraine during the war. Europe always wins when agreements work and promises are kept. And if the decisions of our neighbors are not neighborly, Ukraine will respond in a civilized manner.
So much has been said over the Black Sea grain deal, especially after Russia suspended the agreement in July. Moscow says the reason of the suspension is that parts of its demands have not been implemented so far. Since then, efforts to revive the grain deal have intensified. But now, chances to renew the grain deal between Russia and Ukraine are realistically very slim. Russia earlier stressed that it was not willing to rejoin the Black Sea grain deal unless its demands are met.
The collective rise of developing countries has become an irreversible trend of the times. These were Chinese President words when he met his Zambian counterpart in Beijing. The Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed that China always views its relation with Zambia from a strategic and long-term perspective, and is willing to work with Zambia to turn the profound friendship into an inexhaustible driving force for win-win cooperation in the new era.
Your visit upholds the tradition of friendship which Zambia's former presidents fostered with China, and I extend a warm welcome to you. The traditional friendship between China and Zambia, which was established by the previous generations of leaders of the two countries, has withstood the tests of the changing international landscape. The Tazara railway line is a symbol of the friendship between China and Africa, and the people of our two countries share a special bond with each other. Now developing countries are rising collectively with greater global influence. This has become an irreversible trend of the times.
For his part, Hichilema praised China's development achievement and appreciated China's support for developing countries. Here's Zambia's president.
In our two countries, China and Zambia, Mr. President, Your Excellency, we have seen it all. Successive Zambians have seen it all, the progress that we've made. And we do appreciate and believe that Zambia can learn from your experiences. And we appreciate your role in altering, positively altering the global order so that the global South can take our rightful place in the League of Nations.
The G77 in China kicked off a summit in Havana, Cuba, with a call to change the world order, with Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel chairing the summit. The meeting comes amid widening differences over Russia-Ukraine conflict, climate change, and the global economic system. Cuban president said developing countries were the main victims of a multidimensional crisis, from abusive and unequal trade to global warming.
Let us fight for our right to development, which is also the right to exist as a species. Only then will we be in a position to take part in the scientific and technical revolution on an equal footing. Only then we will be able to take our rightful place in a world that tries to relegate us to the status of meek providers of wealth for minorities. Let us fulfill together the honorable mission of completing it, improving it, and making it fairer and more rational without the permanent threat of disappearing hanging over our dreams.
In the same context, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has praised efforts to support the Global South in the international arena. Guterres called for a more representative and responsive world to the needs of developing economies, stressing that these countries were trapped in a tangle of global crises.
Poverty is on the rise. Hunger is increasing. Prices are soaring. Debt is exorbitant. And climate disasters are becoming more frequent. Global framework systems have failed. The conclusion is clear. The world is failing developing countries.
And the tiny Italian island of Lampedusa is struggling to cope with a surge in migrant boats from North Africa after numbers peaked at 7,000 people. Lampedusa's small island in the Mediterranean has been swarmed by asylum seekers, and with the number of those arriving outnumbering its entire population. Nabil Khazini once again.
There are thousands here stranded in the Italian island of Lampedusa. The number is surging, and they keep coming. Around 2,000 of migrants arriving from Africa have reached the island on Wednesday alone. bringing the total number of migrants here in the small island to around 7,000. This is more than Lampedusa's capacity, whose population is even lesser than the number of migrants. The local reception center, which can only house fewer than 400 people, is now overwhelmed.
After a particularly challenging day like yesterday, today people are being continuously transferred. The current situation inside the hotspot is about 4,200 people. However, it is still decreasing. The situation is certainly complex, and we are gradually trying to return to normality.
Migrants here are waiting to be transferred to reception centers in other areas that are also full. The Italian authorities say nearly 126,000 migrants reached Italy by sea this year, nearly double the number at the time last year. This has toughened Italy's ability to cope with migrant landing. Rome blames Europe for this.
I said it at the beginning. What is happening on Lampedusa is the death of Europe. The dead baby in a migrant boat accident on Wednesday represents the death of Europe. It's political, cultural, social, and value death, because Italy is alone.
Lampedusa, located between Tunisia and Malta, is the first landing port for many migrants seeking to reach the European Union. The island has long been a flashpoint in Europe's migration crisis.
Climate protesters around the world are calling for an end to fossil fuels as the globe suffers dramatic weather extremes and record-breaking heat. Mohammed Khatil has the report.
The Fridays for Future movement, launched in 2018 by Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, made their return in France on Friday, with rallies staged in various cities, including Paris. The French climate activists organized the stunt as part of the global climate strike and were specifically protesting against Total Energy's EACOP oil pipeline project.
Total Energies represents not only a lack of respect for the local populations with a rather neo-colonial way of thinking, but also a lack of respect for the IPCC's recommendations to stop using fossil fuels because they pollute too much. So there's a whole social, climatic and ecocidal effect to the environment that brings us together on a whole range of issues.
In the UK, hundreds of workers walked out of their workplaces on Friday to hold a queue protest demanding the government to do more to tackle climate change. The protesters called for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his ruling Conservative Party to scale up green investment and fossil fuel developments and take more actions to protect nature and wildlife.
If government wants to succeed at all in any of its priorities, whether they are net zero and climate-related priorities, or whether they're simply priorities for growth and productivity, then they need business alongside them. And if government isn't going to listen to a group of business leaders who are prepared to come out and queue, admittedly in the sunshine, then I think we're going to have to ask serious questions about whether this government is serious about achieving its goals.
Climate activists rallied in the Nigerian capital Abuja, calling on the country to end its reliance on fossil fuels.
We are demanding for a just, fair and equitable transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources.
Meanwhile, several protesters were arrested outside Citibank in New York City as part of a demonstration to call for an end to financing fossil fuels. The protesters are being organized by an umbrella of activist groups, including New York Communities for Change and Greenpeace. In a year of mountain deaths and economic destruction from record-breaking floods, wildfires and droughts, protesters have planned more than 500 gatherings in 54 countries, from Pakistan and Nigeria to the United States.
And as highlighted in our top stories, USM Algiers secured their first CAF Super Cup victory against the Egyptian giant Al Ahly. The Algerian team took the African Super Cup with a 1-0 victory over Al Ahly. The decisive moment came in the 42nd minute when Zinedine Blaid calmly converted a penalty, sealing the victory for the Algerians. USM Algiers won last season's African Confederation Cup. Their CAF Super Cup trophy is the second continental title. And that's all for tonight's edition. If you missed any part of it, you can check it in our social media platform. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow with more updates and news.